Imagine you're at the peak of your career. Millions of fans, box office gold, red carpet fame. Then Hollywood comes in and tells you, keep your faith quiet. Don't mention Jesus, it's bad for business. What would you do? For almost a century, two of the most powerful institutions in the West, the church and Hollywood, have lived in near constant enmity. And when a character quotes the Bible or says they're a Christian in a movie or a TV show, most of us probably twinge and think, this is going to be bad. The only permissible prejudice and easiest target for hate is toward Christians. And in an industry where image is everything, standing for Jesus can cost you everything. But these 8 stars chose faith over fame, and their stories prove that when you stand with God, He stands with you. Let's start with one of the most beloved figures in modern American cinema. Reese Witherspoon. Everyone loves America's sweetheart. But what they don't know is that Reese Witherspoon's sweetness comes from something Hollywood rarely celebrates. Raised Episcopal in Nashville, Reese spent 9 years singing her heart out in church choir. And, well, that Southern Christian foundation gave her something Hollywood can't buy: peace. She once stated in an interview that there's little to be afraid of when you give your life to Jesus.
I don't fear death because I know there's heaven. I know it.
And guided by this faith, Reese simply refuses to compromise, even on the smallest things, but especially when it comes to her career. She even refuses to say lines like, "Oh my God," in her movies because she sees it as taking the Lord's name in vain. And in an industry where everyone curses so casually, that's a pretty bold line to draw. But here's what makes Reese's story truly unique. While many celebrities hide their faith, she used hers to create a meaningful body of work. And when she chose to produce The Good Lie, a film about Sudanese Christian refugees, she took the role so seriously that she even decided to take her family with her and visit the actual refugee camp.
I just thought the script was amazing and so thoroughly researched, but just a beautiful film that told the true story of these kids who walked thousands of miles to find safety after their parents were killed.
Reese proves you can be successful while also embracing Jesus. But as we'll see with this next celebrity on the list, not everyone gets off so easy. Kevin Costner. When Kevin Costner mortgaged his entire future on Horizon, an American saga, critics said he was crazy. After all, Westerns were dead, and who cares about pioneers anymore? Especially Christian pioneers who relied on nothing but faith and prayer to survive the brutal American frontier. But to Kevin, this was more than just a movie. This was him returning to something he'd lost a long time ago.
Faith is what guided people out there to the unknown. They just leaned on it.
Growing up Baptist, church was Kevin's foundation.
I grew up a Baptist, and church has always been a part of my life. My grandmother, the whole thing.
But all of that seemed lost by the time he cashed in his big Hollywood paycheck. Then came divine intervention.
I've had hands over me, for sure, in my life, but I've also found that things come in their own time. And it was... I think that's how my career has gone.
Kevin stopped chasing Hollywood's approval and started following God's plan, and something incredible happened. Now, fast forward to the 2024 Cannes Festival, where Horizon earned an impressive 11-minute standing ovation from his peers. This is the moment where it all clicked. Kevin stands up to receive all the love with tears streaming down his face. The story he'd poured his heart into, about settlers whose unshakable faith carried them through impossible odds, managed to move an entire room of Hollywood insiders to their feet. But sometimes the only way to find God is to leave Hollywood behind completely. And that's exactly what the next celebrity on this list did. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you're enjoying these stories. Brooke Shields. At 12 years old, Brooke Shields was already a household name. By 15, she was one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. But fame came with a price Hollywood never warned her about. Cast in controversial films that pushed boundaries she was too young to understand, Brooke became trapped in an industry machine that valued profit over protection.
The commercials that a lot of people would see you as a sex kitten.
How do you feel about all this fuss that's being made over you? You really are an exquisite-looking young lady. I know you've been told that, but isn't she a pretty girl?
For decades, Brooke struggled with the aftermath. Therapy sessions, depression, and a growing emptiness that success couldn't fill. Sure, she'd achieved everything Hollywood promised, and yet felt completely lost.
But it's all about what's going to sell, was evidently their master plan, which is ridiculous.
Then came an unexpected turn. Faith arrived when she needed it most, bringing something no amount of fame ever could. Brooke later revealed,
"It gave me the peace I'd been searching for my whole career."
Brooke finally saw Hollywood for what it really was, a place that never truly cared for her. Now she lives quietly, away from the spotlight, finding peace and faith rather than fame.
But while some stars find faith after trauma, others receive divine calling at their absolute peak. Denzel Washington. It was a moment 50 years in the making. On December 21st, 2024, cameras captured something you don't see every day at Kelly Temple Church of God in Christ in Harlem. Denzel Washington, aka the man who'd conquered Hollywood with films like Training Day and Glory, was getting baptized. But this wasn't a PR stunt. In fact, this moment was 50 years in the making. The story begins in 1975. 20-year-old Denzel sat in his mother's beauty shop. That's when Ruth Green looked at him through the mirror and spoke words that seemed impossible.
She said, "Boy, you are going to travel the world and speak to millions of people." Now, mind you, I was flunked out of college. I'm thinking about joining the army. I didn't know what I was going to do, and she's telling me I'm going to travel the world and speak to millions of people.
Raised as a preacher's kid, Denzel knew about God. For decades, Denzel quietly lived his faith while building an unmatched career. He credits everything to divine grace.
Everything that you think you see in me, everything that I've accomplished, everything that you think I have, and I have a few things, everything that I have is by the grace of God.
Even in controversial roles, he made sure spiritual truth prevailed.
That the only thing I wrote on the cover of Training Day was the wages of sin is death. I had the end of that film changed.
Now, with his minister's license in hand, that prophecy from 1975 is finally complete. Sometimes God's timing takes 5 decades to unfold, but when it does, the world is definitely watching. And speaking of the world watching, our next story involves someone whose faith journey has sparked some pretty heated debates across the globe. Jordan Peterson. He's been called many things: professor, psychologist, cultural phenomenon. But is Jordan Peterson actually a Christian? It's the question that's launched 1,000 debates. This former university professor turned global sensation has made millions of people actually interested in the Bible again. His lectures on biblical stories have garnered hundreds of millions of views. Now that's impressive. So people are dying to know what a man who spent years dissecting Christianity actually believes about himself. The answer came during a conversation with John Rich when asked if he'd surrendered his life to Christ.
I already did that.
What a situation.
Long time ago.
You did?
I did that a long time ago.
But here's what makes Peterson's faith journey refreshing: his brutal honesty about what belief actually means. For instance, when Piers Morgan asked him point blank about believing in God, Peterson's response showed something most Christians won't admit.
I'm terrified that there might be, Piers. How's that? And I'm not trying to be a smartass when I'm making that comment either. Like they say, it's an Old Testament saying, I believe, that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Now that's nuance. Peterson understands that if God is real, we're accountable for everything. That's terrifying because it means life has ultimate meaning and consequences. But make no mistake, these very public debates about God cost Peterson dearly. Universities have ostracized him, media has mocked him, and academic circles have pushed him out. But Peterson keeps speaking truth anyway. Because in a world where most people treat faith like a hobby, Peterson's willing to tackle the biggest questions that actually matter. But while some debate theology, others discover God answers prayer in surprisingly specific ways. Viola Davis. What if I told you that one of Hollywood's most powerful actresses got her perfect husband through prayer? Not just any prayer, the most detailed, specific prayer you've ever heard. Academy Award winner Viola Davis was single and tired of dating disasters when a friend gave her unusual advice about finding love.
He said, even the vacuous stuff, just put it all in there. Looks, everything. I said, really? With God? I got to tell him that? He's like, yes, you got to put it all out there. He was like, be careful.
Skeptical but desperate, Viola got on her knees and made what might be history's most specific husband request.
He said, I want a big black man from the South who's probably been married before, has kids, because I don't want any pressure in that department. Someone who's maybe been an actor, who understands the artistic community, someone who goes to church and loves God.
What happened next feels like divine comedy. Just 3.5 weeks later, she met Julius Tennant. Former football player? Check. From Texas? Check. Previously married with kids? Check. Fellow actor? You guessed it. Check. And his first invitation? Church. Their 2003 marriage has flourished ever since. Together, they've produced faith-based content through Juvie Productions, including the powerful documentary Emmanuel about the Charleston church shooting. When Viola accepted her Oscar for Fences, she couldn't help but acknowledge the source.
I became an artist, and thank God I did, because we are the only profession that celebrates what it means to live a life.
Viola's story proves God hears every detail. Sometimes his sense of humor is perfect. But while some find God through answered prayer, others discover him through unimaginable pain. Jim Carrey. For decades, Jim Carrey was the king of comedy. His rubber face and manic energy brought joy to millions through classics like Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Bruce Almighty. But behind the biggest laughs lived the deepest heartbreak. In 2015, tragedy shattered Jim's world when his girlfriend, Catriona White, took her own life. The devastation deepened when her family pointed fingers at Jim, and the media circus turned vicious. Broken and blamed, Jim faced the ultimate crossroads.
Ultimately, I believe that suffering leads to salvation.
He could choose the path most would take, anger, resentment, or revenge. Or he could choose something Hollywood rarely understands.
And then we make one of two decisions. We either decide to go through the gate of resentment, which leads to vengeance, which leads to self-harm, which leads to harm to others, or we go through the gate of forgiveness, which leads to grace.
Jim chose Jesus. His transformation went beyond just words. He began painting portraits of Christ, pouring his pain and newfound faith into canvas. Each brushstroke became a prayer. Through studying Jesus' own suffering, Jim found a blueprint for healing.
He suffered terribly, and he was broken by it to the point of doubt and a feeling of absolute abandonment, which all of you felt. And then there was a decision to be made. And the decision was to look upon the people who were causing that suffering, or the situation that was causing that suffering, with compassion and with forgiveness.
Today, Jim Carrey stands transformed, proof that our deepest wounds can become our greatest source of wisdom. But sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in tragedy, they're fought in success. Chris Pratt. Here's a scary thought. Success can be more dangerous than failure. At least that's what Chris Pratt discovered when his Christian faith made him Hollywood's favorite target. The journey began long before the fame, sleeping in a beat-up van on Hawaiian beaches, surviving on Bubba Gump Shrimp Company wages. Most people would call it rock bottom. But Chris had been praying his entire life for exactly this moment. When a director discovered him waiting tables and noticing an infectious smile that couldn't be faked, Chris knew this was a divine appointment. Years later, as Star-Lord in Guardians of the Galaxy and the lovable Andy Dwyer in Parks and Recreation, Chris never forgot those prayer-filled nights in the van.
Nothing fills my soul more than to think that maybe some kid watching that would say, hey, I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about praying. Let me try that out, you know? That's like the only way I feel like I could repay what has essentially been a giant gift in my life.
But success brought scrutiny. Social media mobs labeled him Bible bashy, demanded he be canceled, and called him the worst Chris in Hollywood, all for the crime of attending church. But Chris wouldn't budge.
It's the way it is. It ain't nothing new. 2,000 years ago, they hated him too.
When asked how he handles the attacks, Chris doesn't back down.
Oh, just how you deal with anything, just like a rhino. You know, you stick your head down, you keep driving forward, you have thick skin, and if anyone gets in your way, you stick the horn right up their.
Recently, Chris made his boldest declaration yet, saying,
I care enough about Jesus to take a stand, even if it costs me. It could cost me everything, but I don't care.
From homeless to Hollywood hero, Chris Pratt proves that God's timing is always worth the wait. Well, there you have it. 8 stars, 8 journeys, and one simple truth. In a town where faith is seen as career suicide, these celebrities chose something bigger than fame. And you know what happened? God showed up. Just because a Christian is famous doesn't mean they haven't faced spiritual persecution. But as these stories prove, when you stand with God, you're never standing alone. Hollywood may have the spotlight, but God is on the move, and he always has the final say. So, which celebrity's faith journey inspired you most? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below. Until next time.